When mountain hermit Sarah McKenna discovers an ancient iron gate hidden in the Appalachian cliffs during a winter blizzard, she expects to find nothing more than shelter from the storm. Instead, the gate opens into an impossible underground ecosystem. Bioluminescent plants, flowing streams, and chambers that shouldn't exist. But Sarah's wonder turns to horror when she realizes this natural miracle is being used as a laboratory for developing biological weapons that could devastate humanity. Now she must choose between the safety of her isolated existence and exposing a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of government, knowing that powerful people will kill to protect their deadly secrets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind screamed across the ridge like a banshee, driving snow so thick that Sarah McKenna could barely see Jasper's ears in front of her. She pulled her wool cap lower and squinted through the white fury, her weathered hands gripping the lead rope tighter. This wasn't supposed to happen. She knew these mountains like the lines on her palms, had walked every trail and deer path within 20 miles of her cabin. But the blizzard had come out of nowhere, swallowing familiar landmarks and turning the landscape into an alien maze of white. "Easy, boy," she murmured to the grey mule, whose ears were pinned back against the howling wind. Jasper had been her companion for 8 years, since she'd rescued him from owners who'd treated him like a machine rather than a living creature. Now he was all the family she had left, and his obvious distress made her stomach clench with worry. Sarah had been making her monthly supply run to Millbrook, the tiny mountain town that served as her only connection to the outside world. The trip usually took her 2 days, one to reach town, conduct her business trading handmade goods for essentials, and another to return to her isolated cabin. She'd done it dozens of times without incident, even in winter. But this storm had materialized with supernatural speed, as if the mountain itself had exhaled a breath of pure winter fury. The temperature was dropping fast, and she could feel ice crystals forming in her beard where her breath escaped the scarf wrapped around her face. Jasper's breathing was labored, his sturdy frame shivering despite his thick winter coat. They needed shelter, and they needed it soon. Sarah's eyes swept the white landscape, searching for any break in the cliff faces that surrounded them. She'd followed what she thought was a familiar trail, but the snow had erased all recognizable features. Nothing looked right. The rock formations seemed different, more angular somehow, as if she'd wandered into a part of the mountains that followed different geological rules. Then she saw it, a dark gap in the cliff face about 50 yards ahead. Not much, but better than freezing to death in the open. She tugged on Jasper's lead rope, and together they struggled through the knee-deep snow toward what she hoped would be salvation. As they drew closer, Sarah realized the gap was larger than it had appeared, a natural alcove carved into the rock, deep enough to provide real shelter from the wind. She led Jasper inside, immediately feeling the blessed relief as the howling storm became a distant roar. The space was surprisingly spacious, with a sandy floor and walls that curved back into deeper shadows. Sarah began the familiar routine of making camp, her movements automatic after years of mountain living. She unpacked Jasper's burden, set up a small camping stove, and hung a battery-powered lantern from a convenient rock protrusion. The warm, yellow light pushed back the darkness, revealing the full extent of their temporary refuge. That's when she saw the gate. At first, her mind refused to process what she was looking at. It had to be a trick of shadows, a natural rock formation that only resembled worked metal. But as she stepped closer, lantern held high, there was no denying what lay before her. An iron gate, easily 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide, was embedded directly into the living rock of the cliff face. The metalwork was extraordinary. Intricate patterns of vines and geometric shapes that seemed to flow and dance in the flickering light. But it was the symbols that made her breath catch. Strange markings were etched into the metal, characters that belonged to no alphabet she recognized. They seemed almost familiar, as if she'd seen them in dreams, but they definitely weren't Native American petroglyphs or any European script. The metal itself was remarkable. Despite what must have been centuries of exposure to mountain weather, it showed no signs of rust or corrosion. Instead, it gleamed with a dark patina that seemed to absorb and reflect the lantern light in impossible ways. The whole thing had an organic quality, as if it had grown from the mountain rather than being forged and installed. Behind her, Jasper snorted nervously and shuffled his hooves. Sarah glanced back to see him pressed against the far wall of the alcove, his eyes rolling white with fear. In all their years together, she'd never seen him react this way to anything. Not thunderstorms, not mountain lions, not even the time they'd stumbled across a black bear with cubs. "What's got into you, boy?" she whispered, but even as she spoke she felt it too, a wrongness in the air, a sense that they'd wandered somewhere they weren't supposed to be. She should have listened to Jasper's instincts, should have packed up immediately and braved the storm rather than spending another moment near the gate. But curiosity had always been her weakness. It was what had made her a good park ranger 20 years ago, and it was what had led her to ask too many questions about the accident that killed her family, questions that certain people hadn't wanted answered. Sarah approached the gate slowly, one hand extended. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe in the lantern light, playing tricks on her eyes. As her fingers drew near the metal, she felt a strange tingling, like the electrical charge in the air before a lightning strike. The gate was unlocked. Not just unlocked, it was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently passed through and hadn't bothered to secure it properly. Through the gap, Sarah could see only darkness, but she felt warm air flowing out, carrying scents of earth and growing things that had no business existing in the depths of winter. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings. This was wrong, impossible, dangerous. But beneath those thoughts ran a deeper current, the same fascination that had driven her to become a naturalist, to spend her life studying and protecting wild places. Whatever lay beyond that gate was unlike anything in her experience, and despite the fear knotting her stomach, she had to know. Sarah pushed the gate open just wide enough to peer inside. A carved stone passage descended into the mountain at a gentle angle, its walls smooth as glass and inscribed with more of the strange symbols. But it was the air that truly shocked her, not the cold, stale atmosphere she'd expected, but a warm breeze that carried impossible hints of flowers and flowing water. Light seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a soft, phosphorescent glow that made her lantern unnecessary. Behind her, Jasper's distress calls grew more urgent, but Sarah found herself stepping forward, drawn by a force stronger than caution. The passage curved gently downward, and she could hear something that made her heart race, the distant sound of running water, and beneath that, something that might have been singing. She took another step, then another, until Jasper's terrified braying brought her back to herself. Sarah stumbled backward, suddenly aware that she'd been walking into the mountain with no conscious decision to do so. The gate swung shut with a soft click that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. She stood in the alcove, breathing hard, staring at the gate as if it might spring open on its own. Her hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Whatever lay beyond that threshold, it had called to something deep in her soul, and that terrified her more than any blizzard. The storm raged for 3 more hours before finally exhausting itself. When the winds died and the snow stopped falling, Sarah packed her gear with mechanical precision, her mind carefully blank. She led Jasper out of the alcove and back into the transformed landscape, following their own partially filled tracks toward familiar territory. But even as she walked away, she could feel the gate's pull, like gravity tugging at her bones. She'd spent 10 years running from the world and its secrets, but some secrets, it seemed, wouldn't let her run. By the time she reached her cabin, Sarah had already decided she would return. The rational part of her mind catalogued all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. But a deeper voice whispered truths she couldn't ignore, that she'd been slowly dying in her isolation, that the gate represented something beyond her understanding, and that some discoveries were worth any risk. Tomorrow she would go back. Tomorrow she would be prepared. Tomorrow her life would change forever. Marcus Reed's hand hovered over the red phone as the security alert flashed across his monitor. Deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains, in a facility that officially didn't exist, alarms were beginning to sound. But for now, the colonel's attention was focused on more immediate concerns. The monthly supply convoy was 3 hours overdue, and in his line of work, delays meant problems. "Sir?" Sergeant Davies approached his desk with the brisk efficiency that Reed demanded from all his subordinates. "The perimeter sensors detected movement near Grid Section 7 last night. Thermal signatures suggest 2 large mammals took shelter in the outer alcove during the storm." Reed's steel-gray eyes narrowed. Grid Section 7 was the camouflaged entrance to the facility, designed to look like a natural cave formation to any casual observer. The iron gate was hidden behind holographic projectors and electromagnetic fields that should have made it invisible to the naked eye. Should have. Duration of contact? Reed's voice carried the authority of 3 decades in black operations. "Approximately 4 hours, sir. They departed at 800 hours this morning, but—" Davies hesitated. "But what, Sergeant?" "The motion sensors show the subjects approached the gate itself, sir. Got within 2 meters before retreating." Reed's jaw tightened. In 20 years of operating this facility, no civilian had ever gotten close enough to detect the entrance. The electromagnetic fields should have created a sense of unease, a subconscious urge to avoid the area. Yet something or someone had not only resisted that compulsion, but had actively investigated. "Pull up the thermal imagery," Reed commanded. The wall screen flickered to life, showing ghostly heat signatures moving through the storm. Reed watched as 2 forms approached the alcove, one clearly human, the other a 4-legged animal that looked like a horse or mule. His expression darkened as he observed the human figure moving directly toward the concealed gate, lingering there for several minutes before finally retreating. "Run facial recognition on any surveillance footage from the nearby towns," Reed ordered. "I want to know who this is, where they live, and what they're doing in our backyard." But Reed's immediate concerns were interrupted by a more pressing matter. Several miles above his underground command center, Sarah McKenna was preparing for her return journey to the mysterious gate, unaware that her every movement was about to be monitored by one of the most dangerous men in the shadow world of government black operations. Sarah woke before dawn, her body tense with anticipation and dread. She'd barely slept, her dreams filled with images of the strange symbols and the impossible warmth that had flowed from beyond the gate. Now, in the grey light of early morning, the rational part of her mind whispered that she should forget what she'd seen, should continue her isolated existence and leave mysteries to others. But as she prepared her pack with methodical precision, climbing gear, multiple flashlights, spare batteries, emergency rations, and her old park ranger first aid kit, Sarah knew she was already committed to this path. The gate called to something deep in her soul, something that had been dormant for too long. Jasper was waiting in his small corral, and his usual morning greeting of gentle nickering was replaced by nervous snorting as she approached with his tack. His dark eyes rolled with anxiety, and he shied away when she tried to put on his halter. "I know, boy," Sarah murmured, running her hands along his neck in the soothing motions that usually calmed him. "I know you don't like that place, but I have to go back. I have to understand what we found." It took 20 minutes of patient coaxing before Jasper allowed himself to be saddled and loaded with her gear. Even then, he moved with reluctant steps, his ears constantly swiveling as if listening for dangers that only he could perceive. The journey back to the gate took 3 hours through snow that had hardened overnight into a treacherous crust. Sarah's boots broke through with each step, making progress exhausting, but her determination never wavered. The closer they got to their destination, the more agitated Jasper became, until finally she was forced to tie him to a sturdy pine tree 100 yards from the alcove. "Stay here," she commanded, though she knew he had no intention of following her any closer to the gate. "I'll be back soon." The alcove looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, more ordinary, but the gate itself remained exactly as she remembered. An impossible work of art embedded in living rock, its dark metal gleaming with that strange inner light that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Sarah approached slowly, every sense alert. In the harsh light of morning, the symbols on the gate appeared even more alien, their meaning tantalizingly just beyond comprehension. She pulled out her digital camera and began documenting everything, taking dozens of photos from every angle. The gate was still slightly ajar, just as she'd left it. Warm air continued to flow from the gap, carrying those impossible scents of growing things and flowing water. But now she caught something else in the air, a faint electrical smell like ozone after a lightning strike. Sarah checked her flashlight, though the phosphorescent glow from within the passage suggested she might not need it. Then, with a deep breath that felt like diving into deep water, she pushed the gate open and stepped through. The passage was exactly as she remembered. Carved stone walls inscribed with the strange symbols, sloping gently downward into the heart of the mountain. But what struck her most was the warmth. Not just the absence of cold, but actual tropical warmth that made her heavy winter clothing immediately uncomfortable. She began to descend, her footsteps echoing strangely in the tunnel. The phosphorescent glow seemed to respond to her presence, brightening as she approached and dimming behind her, as if the mountain itself was lighting her way. The symbols on the walls appeared to shift and dance in her peripheral vision, but when she looked directly at them, they remained static. After what felt like a mile of gentle descent, the tunnel began to widen. The sound of running water grew stronger, accompanied by other sounds that made no sense. Bird songs, the rustle of leaves, even what might have been distant laughter. The air grew thick with humidity and the rich scent of loam and growing things. Then the tunnel opened into a vast chamber that made Sarah's knees buckle with shock. She stood on a stone platform, overlooking an underground ecosystem that defied every law of nature she knew. Bioluminescent plants provided gentle illumination across a space so large that the far walls disappeared into misty distance. Streams of crystal-clear water flowed along carved channels, feeding pools where strange fish moved like living jewels. Trees that shouldn't exist grew in impossible profusion, their leaves shimmering with colors that had no names. But it was the structures that truly staggered her. Scattered throughout the chamber were buildings, or at least things that might once have been buildings. They seemed to grow from the living rock itself, their organic curves blending seamlessly with the natural formations. Some were clearly ancient, their surfaces worn smooth by millennia of water and time. Others appeared startlingly fresh, their edges sharp and their surfaces unmarked. Sarah descended a carved stairway to the chamber floor, her scientific mind reeling as she tried to process what she was seeing. The air was rich with oxygen, almost intoxicating after years of thin mountain atmosphere. Flowers that looked like they belonged in tropical rainforests bloomed beside Arctic mosses, while overhead, the stone ceiling disappeared into a haze that suggested the chamber might be far larger than she could comprehend. She pulled out her camera and began documenting everything, though she knew the images would never capture the full wonder of this place. As she worked, moving deeper into the chamber, she began to notice details that made her excitement gradually transform into unease. There were paths, not ancient trails worn by generations of feet, but modern walkways with fresh gravel and recently installed handrails. She found a wooden bench that couldn't have been more than a few years old, its surface still bearing the marks of machine tools. Food wrappers. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lay scattered near one of the pools, their bright plastic colors a jarring contrast to the natural beauty around them. Sarah's heart began to race as the implications sank in. This wasn't an undiscovered natural wonder. It was a known location, visited regularly by people who had modern equipment and no apparent reverence for its unique beauty. The trash suggested casual use, as if this miraculous place was nothing more than a break room for whoever worked here. But worked here doing what? And why was there no record of this place in any geological survey or environmental database she'd ever seen? She followed one of the maintained paths deeper into the chamber, her unease growing with each step. The path led to a section where the organic architecture gave way to something unmistakably modern. Concrete walls hidden behind screens of hanging vines, metal doors disguised as natural rock formations, and the barely audible hum of electrical equipment. Sarah's park ranger training kicked in as she approached what appeared to be a camouflaged observation post. She moved with the careful silence she'd learned during years of wildlife monitoring, staying in the shadows and making no unnecessary noise. Through a gap in the vine covering, she could see inside what was clearly a modern laboratory. Computer monitors glowed with data she couldn't interpret, and scientific equipment filled every available surface. But it was the specimens that made her blood run cold. Rows of containment units held samples that pulsed with the same phosphorescent glow as the chamber's natural lighting. But these samples moved with deliberate purpose, reaching toward the glass walls of their containers with appendages that looked disturbingly like grasping fingers. Charts on the walls bore labels like Pathogen Enhancement Protocol and Bioweapon Deployment Timeline. Sarah's hands shook as she raised her camera, but before she could take a photo, she heard voices approaching. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, as two figures in lab coats walked past her hiding spot. Third generation shows promising results, one was saying. The infection rate has increased by 40%, and the incubation period is down to just 6 hours. Excellent, replied the other voice, a woman with a slight accent. Colonel Reed will be pleased. How soon can we begin human trials? Dr. Vasquez, I think we should reconsider. The timeline is not negotiable, the woman, Dr. Vasquez, interrupted. The Pentagon wants deployment options within 6 months. If we can't deliver, they'll find someone who can. The voices faded as the figures moved deeper into the facility, but Sarah remained frozen against the wall, her mind reeling. Bioweapons, human trials, Pentagon deployment. The beautiful underground ecosystem wasn't a natural wonder. It was being used as a laboratory for developing biological weapons. She had to get out, had to document what she'd seen and find someone to report it to, though her faith in official channels had died with her family. But first, she needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. Sarah waited until the voices were completely gone, then crept closer to the laboratory. Through another gap in the vine screen, she could see computer terminals displaying technical data about something called Project Gaia. She pulled out her camera and began photographing everything she could see: the specimen containers, the data charts, the computer screens full of information about pathogen development. That's when she noticed the security camera mounted in the corner of the laboratory, its red light blinking steadily. And with a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air outside, Sarah realized the camera was pointed directly at her hiding spot. She had been discovered. The security camera's red light blinked like a malevolent eye, and Sarah knew her time was running out. But even as panic clawed at her chest, the investigative instincts that had once made her an excellent park ranger kicked in. If she was going to blow this conspiracy wide open, she needed irrefutable evidence, the kind that couldn't be dismissed or buried by powerful interests. Moving with desperate efficiency, Sarah continued photographing everything she could see through the gaps in the vine screening. The computer monitors displayed technical specifications that made her stomach turn: infection rates, mortality projections, and deployment scenarios that read like plans for genocide. One screen showed a map of major population centers with colored overlays indicating optimal dispersal patterns for airborne pathogens. But it was the research notes scattered across one workstation that truly horrified her. Dr. Elena Vasquez's handwriting covered page after page of calculations and observations, detailing how the unique properties of the underground ecosystem's bioluminescent organisms could be weaponized. The natural symbiosis that created this miraculous environment was being perverted into a delivery system for engineered diseases. Sarah photographed everything, her hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Years of field research had taught her to work efficiently under pressure, and she methodically documented the evidence of what could only be described as crimes against humanity. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. More voices were coming, and this time they sounded urgent, almost agitated. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows as three figures in military fatigues emerged from a concealed elevator she hadn't noticed before. "Perimeter breach in Section 7, one of them was saying into a radio. Civilian female, approximately 50 to 60 years old, accompanied by a pack animal. She spent several minutes at the primary access point yesterday evening. Yesterday evening. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized they'd been watching her since the blizzard. These people had known about her discovery from the moment she'd first laid eyes on the gate. "Colonel Reed wants her contained immediately," the soldier continued. "No witnesses, no evidence. Standard protocol for security breaches. Standard protocol for security breaches." The clinical language couldn't disguise what they were really talking about. They intended to kill her. Sarah's mind raced as she considered her options. The laboratory complex was clearly much larger than what she could see from her hiding spot, probably extending deep into the mountain through a network of tunnels and chambers. The soldiers would know every inch of it, while she was completely lost. Her only advantage was that they didn't know exactly where she was yet. But as she shifted position to get a better view of the facility's layout, her elbow knocked against a loose stone. The small sound echoed in the vast chamber like a gunshot. "Did you hear that?" One of the soldiers had excellent hearing. "Southwest quadrant near the biocontainment lab," another replied, already moving in her direction. Sarah abandoned stealth for speed, bursting from her hiding place and running toward what she hoped was the way back to the tunnel entrance. Behind her, shouts erupted as the soldiers spotted her movement. "Target acquired!" Female civilian in unauthorized area, moving to intercept. The phosphorescent plants that had seemed so magical during her initial exploration now worked against her, their glow making it impossible to hide in true darkness. Sarah zigzagged between the ancient structures, using their organic curves as cover, while trying to remember the route back to the tunnel. But the facility was even larger than she'd realized. Passages branched off in multiple directions, some leading to more laboratories, others disappearing into the depths of the mountain. In her panic, Sarah took a wrong turn and found herself in a section she hadn't seen before, a series of chambers containing massive glass tanks filled with glowing, viscous fluid. The tanks held specimens that made her gorge rise. Floating in the luminescent medium were organisms that seemed to be part plant, part animal, part something else entirely. They pulsed with their own inner light, and as Sarah watched in horrified fascination, one of them pressed against the glass of its container, leaving behind a handprint that looked disturbingly human. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, raising her camera to document this fresh horror. That's when she noticed the computer terminal beside the tanks, its screen displaying real-time biometric data about the specimens. But it wasn't the scientific readouts that made her hands shake. It was the classification label at the top of the screen. Human Subject Integration, Phase 3. They weren't just developing bioweapons. They were experimenting on people. Sarah's camera flash reflected off the glass tanks as she photographed everything, but the light also revealed her position to her pursuers. Heavy footsteps echoed from multiple directions as the soldiers closed in on her location. "Seal all exits," a voice barked over radio static. "The civilian has penetrated the human trial section." She's seen too much. Human trial section. The clinical terminology couldn't disguise the magnitude of what Sarah had discovered. This wasn't just a secret government program. It was a full-scale operation that treated human beings as expendable test subjects. As she backed away from the specimen tanks, Sarah's shoulder bumped against something unexpected, another person. She spun around to find herself face to face with Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman whose voice she'd heard earlier discussing pathogen enhancement protocols. Dr. Vasquez was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that held a mixture of surprise and something that might have been guilt. She wore a standard lab coat over casual clothes, and her hands were stained with the same phosphorescent material that glowed in the specimen tanks. "You shouldn't be here," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, her accented voice carrying none of the clinical detachment Sarah had heard earlier. Up close, she looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and the hollow expression of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "Neither should you," Sarah replied, surprised by her own boldness. "Do you have any idea what you're doing here? What you're helping to create?" Dr. Vasquez's expression flickered, a brief crack in her professional composure. "You don't understand. The work we're doing, it's necessary. The applications for medical research alone." "Bioweapons," Sarah interrupted. "I saw the deployment maps, the infection projections. You're not saving lives, you're planning to end them. Millions of them." For a moment, something vulnerable passed across Dr. Vasquez's face. But before she could respond, the sound of approaching soldiers grew louder. Heavy boots echoed through the chamber as the security team closed in from multiple directions. "Dr. Vasquez?" a voice called out. "We have a perimeter breach in your section. Please report your status." The doctor looked at Sarah, then at the radio clipped to her lab coat. For a heartbeat, Sarah thought she might actually help, might choose conscience over complicity. But then Dr. Vasquez's training reasserted itself. "Security, this is Dr. Vasquez. I have the intruder contained in the specimen observation area, moving to detain." But even as she spoke into the radio, Dr. Vasquez was pointing toward a service corridor Sarah hadn't noticed, mouthing the word, "Go." Sarah didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the indicated passage as Dr. Vasquez deliberately knocked over a tray of equipment, creating a loud crash that would mask the sound of Sarah's escape. Behind her, she heard the doctor speaking to the approaching soldiers. "False alarm!" "Probably just some equipment settling. You know how the humidity affects the metal fixtures down here." The service corridor was narrow and poorly lit, clearly intended for maintenance access rather than regular traffic. Sarah ran through darkness that was broken only by occasional emergency lighting, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. Behind her, she could hear renewed shouting as the soldiers realized they'd been deceived. The corridor branched repeatedly, creating a maze of passages that led deeper into the mountain. Sarah chose her route randomly, driven only by the need to put distance between herself and her pursuers. But with each turn, she became more disoriented, more lost in the labyrinthine facility. Finally, exhaustion forced her to stop. Sarah pressed her back against a cold metal wall, breathing hard and trying to process everything she'd witnessed. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. A secret government facility hidden beneath the Appalachian Mountains, conducting illegal experiments on human subjects while developing biological weapons that could devastate entire populations. But who could she tell? Who would believe her? Her last attempt to expose government corruption had cost her everything she cared about. This time, the stakes were even higher, and the people involved clearly had no qualms about killing anyone who threatened their operation. Sarah checked her camera, grateful to see that the digital memory card contained dozens of images documenting the facility's horrors. The evidence was damning, but only if she could survive long enough to get it to someone who could act on it. A new sound made her freeze, the mechanical whine of elevators in motion. The facility was larger than she'd imagined, with multiple levels connected by a network of lifts and passages. And somewhere in that maze, soldiers were hunting her with systematic precision. Sarah forced herself to move again, following the service corridor toward what she hoped was an exit. But as she rounded another corner, she came face to face with a heavy metal door marked "Authorized Personnel Only, Classified Access Required." The door was slightly ajar, And through the gap came the sound of voices engaged in heated discussion. Sarah crept closer, recognizing Dr. Vasquez's accent among the speakers. "Can't simply eliminate every civilian who stumbles across the facility," Dr. Vasquez was saying. "This is the third security breach this year. Eventually people will start asking questions." "That's not your concern, Doctor." This voice was new, older, male, carrying the authority of command. "Your job is to deliver viable weapon systems on schedule. Leave security matters to those qualified to handle them." "Colonel Reed, with respect, I've been dedicated to this project for 20 years. But the direction we're taking, the human trials, the indiscriminate targeting of civilian populations, this isn't what I signed up for." "What you signed up for is irrelevant," Colonel Reed replied coldly. "You signed a contract with the United States government to develop defensive capabilities against biological threats. The applications of that research are classified above your clearance level." "Defensive capabilities?" Dr. Vasquez's voice rose slightly. "These organisms are designed to be undetectable until they've achieved maximum dispersal. The infection vectors target specific genetic markers. This isn't defense, it's genocide." Sarah pressed closer to the door, her camera ready. This conversation was exactly the kind of evidence she needed. Direct acknowledgement from the project's leadership about the true nature of their work. "Dr. Vasquez," Colonel Reed's voice carried a warning, "I'm going to assume that your concerns stem from the stress of our current security situation. But I want to be very clear about something. This project has full authorization from the highest levels of government. Your personal ethical concerns are noted, but they will not interfere with operational objectives." "And if I refuse to continue?" The silence that followed was more chilling than any threat could have been. "I don't think you fully appreciate your situation, Doctor. You've been part of a classified program for 2 decades. You've seen things that could compromise national security if they became public knowledge. Your continued good health depends on your continued cooperation." Sarah's hands tightened on her camera as she processed the full meaning of Reed's words. Dr. Vasquez wasn't just complicit, she was trapped, forced to continue her research by people who would kill her if she tried to leave. But before Sarah could document any more of the conversation, a hand clamped down on her shoulder with crushing force. "Don't move," a voice whispered in her ear. "Don't scream, and definitely don't try to run." Sarah found herself staring into the barrel of a military-grade pistol, held by a soldier whose face was hidden behind tactical gear. Through the weapon's sight, she could see eyes that held no trace of hesitation or mercy. She had been caught. The soldier's grip on Sarah's shoulder was firm, but not brutal, and something in his posture suggested he was more interested in containing her than harming her, at least for the moment. Through the gap in the door, she could still hear Colonel Reed's voice discussing deployment timelines with Dr. Vasquez, unaware that his security had been compromised just yards away. "Move," the soldier whispered, nudging her away from the door with the barrel of his weapon. Slowly, no sudden movements. Sarah complied, her mind racing as they walked down the service corridor. The soldier was young, probably no more than 25. And despite his professional demeanor, she caught a glimpse of uncertainty in his eyes. He was following orders, but he wasn't comfortable with them. "What's your name?" Sarah asked quietly. "Doesn't matter," he replied, but after a moment added, "Corporal Martinez." "How long have you been stationed here, Corporal Martinez?" "Long enough." His voice carried a weariness that seemed disproportionate to his apparent age. "Long enough to know that asking questions isn't part of the job description." They reached a junction where the service corridor intersected with a larger passage. Martinez spoke into his radio with practiced efficiency. "Control, this is Martinez. I have the civilian contained and am moving to detention level 3 for processing." The response crackled back immediately. "Negative, Martinez. Colonel Reed wants her brought to interrogation room Alpha. He wants to debrief her personally before implementing containment protocols." Containment protocols. Sarah's blood chilled as she recognized the euphemism. She'd heard enough military doublespeak during her years as a park ranger to know that containment in this context meant elimination. But as they walked toward what she assumed was her doom, Sarah noticed something that gave her hope. Corporal Martinez's weapon was no longer pointed directly at her, and his posture had relaxed slightly. More importantly, they were moving through sections of the facility she hadn't seen before, areas that looked more like administrative offices than research laboratories. The phosphorescent glow was dimmer here, supplemented by conventional fluorescent lighting that hummed with electrical buzz. Sarah glimpsed offices through open doorways, desks covered with paperwork, computers displaying what looked like budgetary spreadsheets, and walls decorated with mundane motivational posters that seemed surreal in the context of a bioweapons facility. "Corporal," Sarah said as they approached an elevator bank, "do you have family?" Martinez's step faltered slightly. "That's not relevant to your situation." "It is if they live anywhere near a major population center," Sarah pressed. "Because what they're developing down here, it's not designed to be precise. The infection vectors Dr. Vasquez mentioned target genetic markers, but they're broad categories. Thousands of people who share even distant ancestry with targeted populations would be affected." "You don't know what you're talking about," Martinez replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "I have pictures," Sarah said quietly. "Documentation of everything I've seen. The human trial chambers, the deployment maps, the mortality projections. I know exactly what I'm talking about." The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and Martinez gestured for her to enter. But as the doors closed and they began ascending, Sarah noticed he had unconsciously shifted his position so that his weapon was no longer trained on her. "Even if what you're saying is true," Martinez said after a long silence, "what am I supposed to do about it? I'm a soldier. I follow orders." "You're a human being first," Sarah replied. "And human beings have a responsibility to stop genocide when they see it happening." The elevator stopped at what the display indicated was level 2, and the doors opened to reveal a section of the facility that looked like a conventional military command center. Soldiers moved between workstations, displaying tactical maps and communication arrays, while large screens showed satellite imagery of what appeared to be major cities around the world. But it was the smaller monitors that caught Sarah's attention. They displayed real-time surveillance footage from dozens of locations: airports, train stations, shopping centers, schools, all places where large numbers of people gathered, all potential targets for whatever weapons were being developed in the laboratories below. "Jesus," Martinez breathed, apparently seeing the surveillance network for the first time. "How many people are they watching?" Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted from one of the workstations. A technician was gesturing frantically at his screen while speaking rapidly into a headset. "Sir, we have multiple breaches in the external perimeter. Looks like 3, possibly 4 civilians approaching grid sections 4 through 7. They appear to be equipped for winter hiking and are moving directly toward the concealed access points." Colonel Reed's voice boomed across the command center from an intercom speaker. "What's their current position?" "Approximately 200 meters from Section 6, sir. At their current rate of movement, they'll reach the outer sensors in 15 minutes. "Eliminate them," Reed ordered without hesitation. "Make it look like a hiking accident. Hypothermia, perhaps, or a fall. Nothing that would attract outside attention." Sarah's heart stopped. Innocent hikers were about to be murdered simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. She thought of her own discovery of the gate, how easily it could have been some other curious person who stumbled across the facility's secret entrance. "You heard him," Martinez said quietly, but his voice was strained. "That's what happens to people who get too close to this place." "That's what you're going to let happen," Sarah corrected. "You could warn them. I could commit treason and spend the rest of my life in military prison," Martinez interrupted. "If I lived that long, which I probably wouldn't." But even as he spoke, Sarah could see the conflict in his expression. Whatever moral compromises had brought him to this place, the casual murder of innocent civilians was testing the limits of his willingness to follow orders. The technician's voice cut through their whispered conversation. "Sir, the hiking party has changed course. They're moving away from the facility perimeter." "Maintain surveillance," Reed replied. If they approach within 100 meters of any access point, implement termination protocols immediately. Sarah watched the tactical display as 4 heat signatures moved across the mountainous terrain, completely unaware of how close they'd come to death. The casual efficiency with which the facility's personnel prepared to commit murder was chilling, but it also revealed something important about their operational constraints. They needed to maintain plausible deniability. The hikers would only be killed if they got close enough to potentially discover the facility, and even then, their deaths would be disguised as accidents. That suggested the conspiracy, however powerful, wasn't completely beyond accountability. The elevator continued its ascent, stopping finally at level 5. The doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with what were unmistakably interrogation rooms, small chambers with reinforced doors and security cameras mounted at every angle. Martinez guided her toward one of these rooms, but as they walked, Sarah noticed something that made her pulse quicken. An emergency exit sign was visible at the far end of the corridor, marking what appeared to be a stairwell that led to the surface. It was perhaps 50 yards away, but it might as well have been 50 miles, given her current circumstances. "Corporal Martinez," she said as they approached Interrogation Room Alpha, "what happens to me after Colonel Reed finishes his debriefing?" Martinez didn't answer, but the expression on his face told her everything she needed to know. "I see." Sarah's voice was surprisingly calm. "And what happens to Dr. Vasquez when she finally refuses to continue her research?" "That's not my concern," Martinez replied, but his uncertainty was growing more obvious with each exchange. "What about the other scientists? The technicians? The soldiers like yourself who know too much about operations that officially don't exist?" Sarah pressed. "Do you really think Colonel Reed is going to let any of you walk away from this when the project is complete?" They had reached the interrogation room, and Martinez paused with his hand on the door handle. "You're trying to manipulate me." "I'm trying to save both our lives," Sarah replied. "Because once you deliver me to Reed, you become a witness to his interrogation methods. And witnesses are just another kind of security risk." For a long moment, Martinez stared at the door, his internal struggle playing out in the tension of his posture. Finally, he stepped back and lowered his weapon. "There's a service elevator at the end of the corridor," he said quietly. "It goes directly to the motor pool on the surface level. The exit is through the maintenance bay, but you'll need to avoid the security cameras." Sarah stared at him in surprise. "Why are you helping me?" "Because my sister lives in Denver," Martinez replied. "And Denver was highlighted in red on those deployment maps you mentioned." Without another word, he turned and walked away, speaking into his radio as he went. "Control, this is Martinez. The civilian overpowered me and escaped. I'm pursuing, but she's moving toward the service areas. Recommend sealing all maintenance exits." Sarah didn't wait to hear the response. She ran toward the service elevator, her heart pounding with desperate hope. Behind her, alarms began to sound throughout the facility as Colonel Reed's voice echoed from every speaker. "All units, we have a civilian escapee in the upper levels. She is to be considered extremely dangerous and must be stopped at all costs. Lethal force is authorized." The service elevator was exactly where Martinez had indicated, and Sarah pressed the call button with trembling fingers. As she waited for it to arrive, she could hear the sound of running feet and shouting voices growing closer. The elevator doors opened just as the first security team rounded the corner at the far end of the corridor. Sarah dove inside and frantically pressed the button for the surface level as gunfire erupted behind her. The doors closed just as bullets sparked off the metal frame. But as the elevator began to rise, Sarah realized her ordeal was far from over. Even if she reached the surface, she would still be trapped inside a heavily guarded military facility, surrounded by people who had orders to kill her on sight. And somewhere in the laboratories below, Dr. Elena Vasquez continued her work on weapons that could devastate the world, trapped by her own knowledge and the ruthless men who controlled her fate. Sarah checked her camera one more time, ensuring the memory card was secure. Whatever happened next, the evidence of what she'd witnessed had to survive. Too many lives depended on the truth getting out, The elevator shuddered to a stop, and the doors opened to reveal the motor pool, a vast underground garage filled with military vehicles and equipment. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, and Sarah could hear the wail of sirens echoing through the complex. She had perhaps minutes before the entire facility locked down completely. Time enough, perhaps, to reach the surface and escape into the mountains she knew better than anyone else alive. But first, she had to survive the next few hundred yards. The motor pool was a cavern of shadows and mechanical shapes, filled with everything from standard military Humvees to specialized all-terrain vehicles designed for mountain operations. Red emergency lighting cast everything in an ominous glow, and the wail of alarms made it impossible to hear approaching footsteps until they were dangerously close. Sarah crouched behind a massive supply truck, trying to orient herself in the chaos. The maintenance bay Martinez had mentioned was visible at the far end of the garage, a set of heavy doors marked with warning signs about authorized personnel only. Between her current position and those doors lay perhaps 200 yards of open ground dotted with vehicles and storage containers that offered sporadic cover. The sound of boots on concrete echoed from multiple directions as security teams spread out through the motor pool. Sarah could hear radio chatter coordinating the search, voices calling out grid references and confirming that all exits were being monitored. Alpha Team, take the north wall. Bravo Team, secure the maintenance bays. Charlie Team, sweep the vehicle rows systematically, a voice commanded. Remember, shoot to kill. This civilian has compromised national security. Sarah's blood ran cold at the casual brutality of the order, but it also crystallized her determination. These people viewed human life as expendable in service of their twisted agenda, and that made them more dangerous than any natural predator she'd encountered in the mountains. Moving with the stealth skills learned from years of wildlife observation, Sarah began working her way between the vehicles toward the maintenance bay. She stayed low, using the shadows cast by emergency lighting to mask her movement, and paused frequently to listen for approaching footsteps. As she crept past a row of unmarked vans, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. One of the vehicles had its rear doors slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see sophisticated communications equipment, satellite uplinks, encrypted radios, and computer terminals that looked far more advanced than anything she'd seen in the facility's administrative areas. More importantly, she could hear voices coming from inside the van, speaking in urgent whispers. "Can't continue like this much longer," a woman was saying. "The human trials are accelerating, and Reed is talking about moving to the deployment phase ahead of schedule." Sarah recognized the voice immediately, Dr. Elena Vasquez. "Elena, you knew what this project would eventually require," replied a male voice she didn't recognize. "The question is whether you're prepared to do something about it." "I've been documenting everything," Dr. Vasquez responded. "Research protocols, test results, the complete biological weapons program. But I need help getting the information to people who can act on it." "That's why I'm here," the man replied. "But we have to move carefully. Reed has contacts throughout the intelligence community, and—" A sudden burst of radio static from inside the van interrupted the conversation, followed by an urgent voice. "All units, the civilian has been spotted in grid section 7. She's moving toward the maintenance bay. Converge on that position immediately." Sarah's heart sank as she realized her careful movement through the garage hadn't been as stealthy as she'd hoped. Security cameras or motion sensors had betrayed her location, and now the entire search was focusing on her area. But the conversation in the van had revealed something crucial. Dr. Vasquez wasn't just a complicit scientist. She was actively working to expose the bioweapons program, and she had an ally helping her document the conspiracy. As boots thundered across the concrete floor toward her position, Sarah made a desperate decision. Instead of continuing toward the maintenance bay, she approached the van and knocked softly on its rear doors. The conversation inside stopped immediately. "Dr. Vasquez," Sarah whispered urgently, "I'm the civilian they're hunting. I have photographs of the facility. documentation of the human trials. We need to work together. The van's doors opened slowly, revealing Dr. Vasquez and a man in his 30s, wearing civilian clothes that didn't quite conceal his military bearing. Both looked shocked to see her. "How did you—" Dr. Vasquez began. "Get in," the man interrupted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her into the van. "Now." The interior of the vehicle was cramped but sophisticated, with communication equipment lining every wall. Banks of monitors displayed feeds from security cameras throughout the facility, and Sarah could see armed teams moving through various levels in systematic search patterns. "I'm Agent Rebecca Stone," the man said as he secured the van's doors. "CIA, but I'm operating outside official channels on this one." "CIA?" Sarah's distrust of government agencies flared immediately. "How do I know you're not just another part of this conspiracy?" "Because if I were, you'd already be dead," Stone replied bluntly. "Dr. Vasquez contacted my agency 3 months ago through back channels, claiming that a classified bioweapons program was violating international treaties. My investigation led me here, but what I've found is far worse than anything we suspected." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her face drawn with exhaustion and stress. "The organisms they're developing, they're not just biological weapons. They're designed to be self-replicating, self-modifying. Once released, they would continue to evolve and spread beyond any possibility of control." "Doomsday weapons," Sarah breathed. "Worse," Stone interjected. "Doomsday weapons with artificial intelligence. The biological components are integrated with nanotechnology that allows them to adapt to countermeasures in real time. Dr. Vasquez believes they could potentially threaten all life on Earth." Sarah stared at the scientist, trying to process the full horror of what she was hearing. "You helped create this?" Dr. Vasquez's expression crumpled with guilt and self-recrimination. "I thought I was working on defensive systems, vaccines and treatments for biological threats. The research was compartmentalized. I only saw my piece of the puzzle. By the time I understood the true scope of the program, I was in too deep to simply walk away." "So you stayed and documented everything," Stone added. "Elena has been building a case against the program for months, but she needed help getting the evidence to people who could shut it down. And you just happened to stumble into the middle of our operation," Dr. Vasquez said to Sarah. "What you've seen, the human trials, the deployment preparations, we have documentation of all of it. Combined with your photographs, we might finally have enough evidence to stop this program." Through the van's monitors, Sarah could see security teams getting close. "There are innocent people down there." "There are innocent people everywhere," Dr. Vasquez replied sadly. "That's what I finally realized when I saw the target lists. The bioweapons aren't designed to distinguish between combatants and civilians, between the guilty and the innocent. They're designed to kill indiscriminately." Stone was monitoring multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, his expression growing more grim with each transmission. "Reed's requesting authorization for Protocol 7. That's the nuclear option, literally. If they can't contain this breach conventionally, they'll blame it on a terrorist attack and use tactical nuclear weapons to sterilize the entire area." "Nuclear weapons?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "In the middle of West Virginia?" "The cover story is already prepared," Stone explained. "Terrorist cells using stolen nuclear material to attack American soil. It would justify massive increases in defense spending and expanded domestic surveillance programs. Reed's people have been planning for this contingency from the beginning. The implications were staggering. Not only were they developing biological weapons that could devastate the planet, but they were prepared to use nuclear weapons against American citizens to cover up their crimes." "We have to get this information out immediately," Sarah said. "Every major news organization, every foreign government, It's not that simple," Stone interrupted. "Reed has contacts throughout the media and intelligence communities. Any conventional channels we use will be compromised before the story can break." "Then what do you suggest?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "We use unconventional channels," Stone replied, typing commands into one of the communication terminals. There are people in the international community who've been watching for exactly this kind of program. Whistleblower networks, independent journalists, foreign intelligence services that have their own reasons for wanting to expose American black operations. As he worked, Sarah noticed movement on one of the security monitors. A familiar figure was walking through the motor pool, apparently searching for something. It was Corporal Martinez, and he was alone. "That soldier helped me escape from the interrogation level," Sarah said, pointing to the screen. "He might be willing to help us." Stone looked skeptical. "Or he might be leading security teams to our location." "He risked his life to get me out of Reed's hands," Sarah insisted. "His sister lives in one of the cities on the target list. He has personal motivation to stop this program." Dr. Vasquez was studying the monitor intently. "Martinez has been asking questions about the research protocols for weeks. I think he's been having doubts about the mission." "It's a risk," Stone admitted, "but we need someone with facility access to help us transmit the data. The communications array in this van can reach international networks, but only if we can get past the facility's jamming systems." Sarah made the decision for all of them. She opened the van's rear doors and called out softly to Martinez. The young soldier spun around, his weapon raised, but when he saw Sarah, his posture relaxed slightly. "What are you doing?" he whispered urgently. "The entire facility is looking for you." "Trying to save your sister's life," Sarah replied, "and the lives of millions of other innocent people." Martinez approached the van cautiously, but when he saw Dr. Vasquez and the sophisticated communication equipment, his expression changed to one of understanding. "You're not just a random hiker, are you?" he said to Sarah. "No," she replied. "I'm someone who stumbled onto the biggest conspiracy in human history, and these people are trying to stop it before it kills everyone we care about." Martinez looked at the monitors showing security teams searching the facility, then at the communication equipment that could potentially expose the bioweapons program to the world. "What do you need me to do?" The van's cramped interior buzzed with tense energy as Agent Stone quickly briefed Corporal Martinez on the scope of the conspiracy and what they needed to accomplish. Outside, security teams continued their systematic search of the motor pool, their voices echoing off the concrete walls as they moved between vehicles. "The facility's communication system operates on a closed network," Stone explained, pulling up schematics on one of his terminals. "To transmit our evidence to the outside world, we need to access the main server room and disable the jamming protocols that prevent unauthorized signals from leaving the complex." Martinez studied the facility layout displayed on the screen. "That's in the secure zone, level 8. You need biometric authorization from someone with alpha clearance or higher." "Dr. Vasquez has beta clearance," Stone noted. "That should be sufficient if we can get her to the right terminal." "Beta clearance won't work for the main communication hub," Martinez shook his head. "Reed changed the protocols after the last security audit. Only senior staff have access now." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "What about the research network?" "The biological monitoring systems operate on a separate server cluster that has external communication capability. It's how we report data to oversight committees." "You mean the committees that don't actually exist?" Stone asked grimly. "The communication pathways exist, even if the oversight doesn't," Dr. Vasquez replied. "I've been using those channels to document the program's violations. If we can access the biological research servers, we can piggyback our transmission through their external links." Martinez was monitoring the security frequencies on his radio. "Reed's getting impatient. He's ordered teams to start checking vehicles systematically. We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach this area." "The research servers are in the biocontainment section," Dr. Vasquez continued. "I can get us there, but we'll have to go through some of the most heavily monitored areas of the facility." Sarah had been studying the facility schematics, her park ranger training helping her visualize the complex, three-dimensional layout. "What about the service tunnels?" "Every facility this size needs maintenance access routes that bypass the main corridors. The service tunnels are monitored too," Martinez pointed out. Motion sensors, security cameras, automated defense systems. But they're not designed to stop someone with legitimate access, Stone observed. If Dr. Vasquez uses her credentials to enter the service network, she could move through the facility without triggering general alarms. I can't take all of you, Dr. Vasquez said. The biocontainment protocols require individual authorization for each person entering the research areas. Then you don't take all of us, Sarah replied. You take the evidence, my photographs, Stone's documentation, whatever files you've compiled. Upload everything to multiple locations simultaneously so Reed can't suppress it all. Stone was already transferring data to portable storage devices. I've been building a network of secure drop sites for months. News organizations, foreign intelligence services, international monitoring agencies. If we can transmit to even half of them, the story will be too big to contain. Dr. Vasquez took the storage devices with trembling hands. If I'm caught, you're already caught, Stone interrupted gently. Reed knows you've been asking too many questions, documenting too much information. Whether we act now or not, your time here is limited. Through the van's monitors, they could see security teams getting closer. One group was systematically checking vehicles in the row adjacent to theirs, while another team was setting up some kind of scanning equipment near the maintenance bay exits. They're deploying portable biometric scanners, Martinez observed. Even if you reach the surface, they'll be able to track anyone who's been inside the facility. Not if the facility doesn't exist anymore, Stone said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. The nuclear sterilization protocol, Stone explained. If Reed can't contain this breach, he'll implement the final contingency. The entire complex will be destroyed, along with everyone in it and a significant portion of the surrounding mountain. How much time would we have? Sarah asked. From authorization to detonation, probably 30 minutes, maybe less. Dr. Vasquez's face had gone pale. There are over 200 people working in this facility. Most of them have no idea what the real purpose of the research is. Which is why we have to stop Reed before he gets that authorization, Stone replied. Eleanor, how long do you need to upload the evidence? If I can reach the biocontainment servers without interference, maybe 15 minutes for a complete data transfer. Martinez was studying the tactical displays, his military training evident in how he analyzed the security team positions. I can create a distraction, draw some of the search teams away from the research areas. What kind of distraction? Sarah asked. The motor pool has fuel storage tanks and ammunition depots, Martinez explained. A fire in the right location would require immediate response from security teams throughout the facility. That's incredibly dangerous, Dr. Vasquez protested. The fire suppression systems use chemical agents that are toxic in enclosed spaces. More dangerous than nuclear sterilization, Martinez countered. Stone was monitoring communications from Reed's command center, his expression growing more concerned with each intercepted transmission. We're running out of time. Reed is preparing to contact his superiors about implementing emergency protocols. Dr. Vasquez made her decision. Give me the storage devices. You'll get to the biocontainment servers and upload everything we have. I'm coming with you, Sarah said. No, Dr. Vasquez shook her head. The biometric systems will detect unauthorized personnel immediately. Then authorize me, Sarah replied. You have administrative access to the security systems. Create a temporary clearance for me as a research consultant or visiting scientist. That might work, Stone agreed. But once you're in the system, Reed will know exactly where you are. He already knows where I am, Sarah pointed out. At least this way I can help Elena if something goes wrong. Martinez had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. There's something else you need to know. Reed has been in contact with someone outside the facility, someone with authority to override standard protocols. I heard him mention something called Project Resurrection, and Dr. Vasquez went white. Project Resurrection was supposed to be theoretical, a contingency plan for if the biological weapons were ever turned against American targets. What kind of contingency plan? Stone demanded. Selective genetic targeting, Dr. Vasquez whispered. Bioweapons designed to affect only specific ethnic or genetic groups, while leaving others unharmed. The ultimate weapon for genocide without collateral damage to desirable populations. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Not only were they developing biological weapons capable of global devastation, but they were also creating tools for systematic ethnic cleansing that could make the Holocaust look like a small-scale atrocity. That's what this has always been about, Stone realized. Not defense against biological threats, but the capacity to reshape global demographics according to someone's vision of racial purity. We have to stop this, Sarah said with quiet intensity. Whatever the risk, we can't let these weapons be completed. Dr. Vasquez was already entering commands into her tablet, creating temporary security clearances for Sarah. I'm listing you as Dr. Sarah McKenna, consulting ecologist brought in to assess environmental impact of the research organisms. How long will that clearance last? Stone asked. 24 hours, unless Reed specifically revokes it. Martinez stood up, checking his weapon and equipment. I'll start the distraction in 5 minutes. That should give you time to reach the research levels before security realizes what's happening. What about evacuation? Sarah asked. If this facility really is destroyed, how do we get the innocent personnel out? The emergency evacuation procedures are automated, Dr. Vasquez explained. If the nuclear protocol is initiated, the facility will sound general alarms and open all security barriers. But we're talking about a 30-minute window to evacuate over 200 people through mountain terrain in winter conditions. Some of them won't make it, Stone said bluntly. Most of them won't make it if we don't act, Sarah replied. At least this way we give them a chance. Through the monitors, they could see security teams positioning themselves for a final sweep of the motor pool. Time had run out for planning and preparation. Dr. Vasquez gathered the storage devices and secured them in her lab coat. If I don't make it to the servers, promise me you'll find another way to get this information out. You'll make it, Sarah said with conviction. We all will. But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew they were facing odds that made survival unlikely. Reed commanded a facility full of armed personnel, had contacts throughout the government and intelligence community, and possessed weapons capable of destroying everyone within a 50-mile radius. Their only advantages were the truth and the determination to expose it before more innocent lives were lost. Martinez reached for the van's door handle. See you on the other side, he said quietly. As he slipped out into the motor pool and disappeared among the vehicles, Sarah and Dr. Vasquez prepared for what might be their final mission together. In a few minutes, they would either succeed in exposing one of the most dangerous conspiracies in human history, or they would die trying. Either way, the world would never be the same. The explosion that Martinez triggered in the motor pool's fuel depot sent shockwaves through the entire facility. Emergency klaxons wailed as fire suppression systems activated, filling corridors with chemical foam, while security teams rushed to contain what appeared to be a catastrophic accident. Sarah and Dr. Vasquez used the chaos to move through service corridors toward the biocontainment levels. The temporary security clearance worked perfectly, allowing them to bypass checkpoint after checkpoint, while emergency responders focused on the supposed disaster above. Martinez's distraction is working better than expected, Dr. Vasquez whispered as they descended through levels of increasing security. Reed has pulled teams from research areas to deal with the fire. But as they approached the biocontainment servers, Sarah noticed something wrong with Dr. Vasquez's behavior. The scientist kept checking her watch and seemed increasingly nervous, beyond what the situation warranted. Lena, Sarah said quietly, is there something you're not telling me? Dr. Vasquez stopped walking and turned to face her, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Before Sarah could react, armed soldiers emerged from concealment positions throughout the corridor. Colonel Reed stepped out from behind them, his expression coldly triumphant. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Reed said formally. You've done excellent work. The security breach has been contained exactly as planned. Sarah stared at Dr. Vasquez in shock and betrayal. You're working for him. She never stopped working for me, Reed corrected. Dr. Vasquez has been our inside operative from the beginning, identifying potential security risks and drawing them into situations where they could be eliminated. Dr. Vasquez was sobbing now. They have my daughter, Sarah, my little girl. They've had her for 3 years, hidden away somewhere. This was the only way to keep her alive. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Every conversation, every shared moment of apparent alliance, it had all been manipulation designed to lead her into Reed's hands. Agent Stone? Sarah asked. Real CIA, but he doesn't know about Dr. Vasquez's true situation, Reed explained. He'll be dealt with separately, as will Corporal Martinez, whose heroic sacrifice in trying to contain the motor pool fire will be remembered appropriately. Sarah's heart sank as she realized Martinez was probably already dead, killed while trying to help them escape. The evidence we gathered is already in our possession, Reed interrupted. Dr. Vasquez has been monitoring your activities since you first entered the facility. Every photograph, every document, every piece of so-called evidence has been catalogued and will be destroyed along with you. But even as Reed spoke, Sarah noticed something he apparently hadn't. Dr. Vasquez was subtly manipulating her tablet, entering commands while pretending to wipe away tears. However, Reed continued, your intrusion has served a useful purpose. It's provided the perfect justification for implementing Protocol 7, a terrorist attack on American soil with biological weapons stolen from a legitimate research facility. The American people will demand decisive action. You're going to blame this on terrorists. Foreign agents who somehow obtained advanced bioweapons and used them against innocent civilians, Reed confirmed. The nuclear response will be regrettable, but necessary to prevent further attacks. Sarah saw Dr. Vasquez press a final command on her tablet before letting it fall to the floor. Whatever she had done, it was too late for Reed to stop it now. Elena, Reed said, noticing the dropped tablet. What did you just do? Dr. Vasquez looked up at him with defiant eyes. I uploaded everything. Every file, every photograph, every piece of evidence about Project Resurrection. It's already transmitting to news organizations around the world. Reed's face went white with rage. That's impossible. The communication systems are completely isolated. The biological monitoring network has its own satellite uplinks, Dr. Vasquez replied. I've been building back doors into those systems for months. The moment I activated the upload protocol, everything we documented started broadcasting on emergency frequencies to international oversight agencies. You've doomed your daughter, Reed snarled. My daughter died 2 years ago, Dr. Vasquez replied quietly. I've been living with that knowledge while you used her memory to control me. But I won't let you use her to destroy the world. Reed drew his sidearm and shot Dr. Vasquez without hesitation. As she collapsed, Sarah lunged forward to help her, but the soldiers immediately restrained her. Initiate nuclear sterilization immediately, Reed barked into his radio. Authorization code 77 Alpha. Detonation in 15 minutes. Dr. Vasquez was dying, but she managed to whisper to Sarah, the evidence is out there now. People will know the truth. Sarah knelt beside her as the facility's evacuation alarms began to sound throughout the complex. Agent Stone had never believed in Dr. Vasquez's betrayal story. His years in intelligence had taught him to recognize coercion when he saw it, and Elena's behavior had shown all the signs of someone being controlled through leverage rather than genuine loyalty. When the biocontainment levels upload began transmitting to his hidden relay stations, Stone knew that Elena had found a way to complete their mission despite Reed's trap. Now he had 15 minutes to ensure the evidence reached its intended recipients and that as many innocent people as possible escaped the nuclear sterilization. The facility's evacuation alarms were already sending personnel running toward emergency exits, but Stone knew the mountain terrain and winter conditions would make escape nearly impossible for most of them. Unless someone provided guidance and coordination, hundreds of people would die when the tactical nuclear device detonated. Stone made his way to the facility's emergency command center, where automated systems were coordinating the evacuation. Using his CIA credentials and knowledge of military protocols, he accessed the facility's communication array and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. All personnel, this is Agent Stone, CIA. The facility is under nuclear threat with detonation in 12 minutes. Follow emergency route Alpha 7 to the northeast exit. Do not attempt to retrieve personal belongings. Repeat, nuclear detonation imminent. Meanwhile, in the bio-containment level, Sarah was being held at gunpoint, while Reed frantically tried to stop the data transmission. But Dr. Vasquez had designed her upload protocol to be unstoppable once initiated. The files were fragmenting and routing through multiple satellite networks simultaneously. "You can't stop it now," Sarah told Reed as he worked at a computer terminal. "The truth is already out there." "Truth is whatever people choose to believe," Reed replied coldly. "And people will believe that foreign terrorists use stolen American bioweapons against innocent civilians. The nuclear response will be justified, and the real weapons will be blamed on our enemies." But as Reed worked, Sarah noticed something he had missed. The facility's structural integrity was already compromised by Martinez's explosion in the motor pool. The nuclear device would do more than sterilize the immediate area. It would trigger a massive collapse that could affect the entire mountain ecosystem. "You'll destroy the underground chambers," Sarah realized. "The ecosystem that survived for millennia, you'll wipe it out completely." "Acceptable losses," Reed replied without looking up from his terminal. Sarah thought about the bioluminescent plants, the impossible streams, the ancient beauty that had first drawn her into this nightmare. All of it would be destroyed to cover up Reed's crimes. That's when she heard a familiar sound, Jasper's distinctive braying echoing through the facility's corridors. Somehow her loyal mule had found his way into the complex, probably following her scent, despite his fear of the place. The sound distracted Reed for just a moment, but it was enough. Sarah broke free from her guards and ran toward the source of Jasper's calls, hoping against hope that her companion had found another way out of the doomed facility. Behind her, Reed shouted orders to his remaining soldiers while the countdown to nuclear detonation continued inexorably. With 8 minutes until detonation, the facility had become a maze of panicking personnel and failing systems. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, while evacuation alarms created a constant din of desperation. Sarah found Jasper in a service corridor, the faithful mule having somehow navigated the complex following air currents that carried her scent. His presence gave her hope, but also a terrible responsibility. She couldn't save herself without also finding a way to save him. "How did you get in here, boy?" she whispered, running her hands along his neck to calm him. Jasper's survival instincts had led him through passages that human searchers had missed, and Sarah realized he might know a way out that others hadn't considered. The mule turned and began walking back the way he had come, looking over his shoulder to ensure Sarah was following. His route led through maintenance areas she hadn't seen before, spaces barely large enough for human passage but adequate for someone willing to crawl. Meanwhile, Reed's remaining soldiers were implementing the final phase of Protocol 7, placing additional explosive charges throughout the facility to ensure complete destruction of all evidence. But Reed himself was focused on a different priority, the original Iron Gate that had started this entire crisis. "Sir," one of his soldiers reported, "we should evacuate to minimum safe distance." "Not yet," Reed replied, studying readings from the bio-containment sensors. "The upload is still active. As long as those transmissions continue, our cover story becomes less credible." But Reed had underestimated the scope of Dr. Vasquez's preparation. The data wasn't just uploading, it was also being processed by artificial intelligence systems that were automatically translating the technical information into accessible formats for journalists and investigators. Agent Stone, monitoring the transmissions from his position in the Emergency Command Center, watched as news organizations around the world began receiving detailed reports about Project Resurrection and the facility's bioweapons program. The story was too big and too well documented to suppress. "Agent Stone," Reed's voice crackled through the facility's intercom system. "You've caused enough damage. Surrender yourself, and I'll ensure your death is quick." Stone keyed his radio in response. "Colonel Reed, this is Agent Rebecca Stone, CIA. You are under arrest for crimes against humanity, treason, and violation of international bioweapons treaties. Surrender immediately." The revelation that Agent Stone was actually Agent Rebecca Stone and that she was a woman sent ripples of confusion through Reed's remaining personnel. Many of them had been questioning their orders already, and this final deception pushed several over the edge. "Colonel," one of Reed's soldiers said, lowering his weapon. "Sir, I can't continue following orders from someone who's been lying to us about everything." But Reed was beyond reason now. With 3 minutes until nuclear detonation, he activated the facility's final contingency, a lockdown protocol that sealed all exits and trapped everyone inside. Sarah and Jasper had found their way to the original Iron Gate, the mysterious entrance that had started her journey into this nightmare. The gate stood open, offering passage back to the underground chambers, but Sarah knew those beautiful spaces would be destroyed along with everything else. Unless the chambers were natural formations that had survived for millennia. They might be deep enough and structurally separate enough to survive the nuclear blast. And if Dr. Vasquez was right about the ecosystem's unique properties, the organisms there might represent humanity's best hope for developing countermeasures to the bioweapons Reed had created. With 90 seconds until detonation, Sarah made her choice. Instead of trying to reach the surface, she led Jasper through the Iron Gate and into the phosphorescent depths of the mountain's heart. Behind them, Colonel Reed's facility began its final countdown to destruction, while above ground, the first news reports about Project Resurrection started appearing on international networks. The truth was finally coming to light, even as the underground world that had revealed it prepared to face annihilation. 6 months later, Sarah McKenna stood before a congressional hearing committee, her weathered hands steady as she held up photographs of the underground chambers. The bioluminescent ecosystem had indeed survived the nuclear blast, protected by miles of solid rock and geological formations that had withstood millennia of natural disasters. "The chambers represent more than just scientific wonder," Sarah testified. "They're proof that nature finds ways to preserve life even in the darkest circumstances." The facility's destruction had been attributed to a terrorist attack, just as Reed had planned, but Dr. Vasquez's uploaded evidence had quickly exposed the truth. International tribunals were still processing war crimes charges against surviving conspirators, while the bioweapons program had been completely dismantled. Agent Rebecca Stone, now heading a new environmental protection task force, nodded approvingly from the gallery. Corporal Martinez, who had survived his heroic distraction despite severe burns, sat beside her. The young soldier had become a key witness in exposing the full scope of Project Resurrection. But the most important testimony came from an unexpected source. Tommy Chen, the grocery store clerk who had unknowingly helped trigger the investigation, had started a foundation supporting whistleblowers and environmental protection. His grandmother's store now served as a meeting point for scientists studying the preserved ecosystem. Sarah had chosen to remain in the mountains, but now as official guardian of the newly designated International Biological Preserve. The Iron Gate had been sealed and protected, accessible only to authorized researchers working to understand the unique organisms that had inadvertently helped expose one of history's greatest conspiracies. As she concluded her testimony, Sarah thought about Jasper, grazing peacefully in the meadow above the chambers. Together, they had found their purpose again, not running from the truth, but protecting it. The mountain still held its secrets, but now they were secrets worth preserving rather than destroying. 1 year after the congressional hearings, Sarah McKenna stood at the entrance to the underground chambers, watching as Dr. Maria Santos, Elena Vasquez's former research partner, emerged from the phosphorescent depths with the expression of wonder that never seemed to fade, no matter how many times she descended into the mountain's heart. The symbiotic relationships are even more complex than we initially thought, Dr. Santos reported, carefully sealing containers of bioluminescent samples. The organisms don't just coexist. They actively communicate through biochemical signals that span the entire ecosystem. It's like the mountain itself is alive. Sarah nodded, understanding more than the scientist realized. And during the long months of recovery and investigation following the facility's destruction, she had spent countless hours in the chambers, learning to read the subtle changes in the phosphorescent patterns that indicated the ecosystem's health and mood. The mountain did feel alive, and it had accepted her as its guardian. The new research station built above the chambers was a model of environmental sensitivity. Unlike Reed's hidden facility, this installation operated with complete transparency, its findings shared with the international scientific community in real time. Solar panels and wind turbines provided clean energy, while the structure itself was designed to leave minimal impact on the surrounding wilderness. "Any word from Rebecca?" Dr. Santos asked as they walked toward the research station. "She's in Geneva this week, testifying at the War Crimes Tribunal," Sarah replied. Reed's network was larger than we initially realized. Tentacles reaching into defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, even some universities. It's going to take years to untangle all the connections. Rebecca Stone had become a formidable force in the international effort to prevent biological weapons development. Her Environmental Protection and Oversight Task Force now operated in 14 countries, using the evidence from Project Resurrection as a template for identifying similar programs before they could reach operational status. Tommy Chen jogged up the mountain path toward them, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. The young man had transformed from a college dropout into one of the most effective advocates for government transparency in the country. His foundation had helped expose 3 additional black operations programs in the past year alone. "Sarah, you need to see this," Tommy called out, waving his tablet computer. "The president just signed the International Biological Oversight Treaty. Every major nation has agreed to mandatory monitoring of biological research programs." Sarah smiled, remembering the naive young man who had once asked innocent questions about her unusual supply purchases. That curiosity had helped save the world, and it continued to drive his work exposing government corruption. "Elena would have been proud," Dr. Santos said quietly. "Her sacrifice made all of this possible." They observed a moment of silence for Dr. Elena Vasquez, whose daughter's memorial now stood in the mountain meadow above the chambers. Sarah visited the small stone marker regularly, often finding fresh flowers left by other scientists who understood the price Elena had paid for her conscience. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted their reflection. Sarah looked up to see a medical evacuation aircraft descending toward the research station's landing pad, followed by a military transport that bore the insignia of the United Nations. "That would be our VIP visitor," Dr. Santos explained. "Dr. James Morrison from the World Health Organization. He's here to assess our progress on developing countermeasures to engineered pathogens." Sarah had mixed feelings about the high-level attention the preserve was receiving. On one hand, the research being conducted here could potentially save millions of lives if biological weapons were ever deployed by hostile forces. On the other hand, she worried about the ecosystem becoming just another tool in humanity's endless cycle of weapons development and defense. As the helicopters landed, Sarah noticed a familiar figure emerging from the medical aircraft. Corporal Martinez, now Major Martinez after his promotion and reassignment to the UN Biological Weapons Monitoring Division, walked toward them with only a slight limp remaining from his injuries in the motor pool explosion. "Sarah," Martinez greeted her with genuine warmth. "The mountain looks good, peaceful. It's learning to trust humans again." Sarah replied.
Slowly.
Martinez gestured toward the UN transport. I brought someone who wanted to meet you. Dr. Morrison has been following your work here, and he has a proposition. Dr. Morrison proved to be a soft-spoken man in his 60s, with the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades dealing with international bureaucracy. As they toured the research facilities, he explained his mission with careful precision. The organisms you've preserved here represent our best hope for developing universal countermeasures to biological weapons, he said. Their adaptive properties could potentially neutralize engineered pathogens before they can establish infection patterns. You want to weaponize them, Sarah said bluntly. I want to save lives, Dr. Morrison corrected. But I understand your concerns. Reed's program began with similar justifications, defensive research that gradually transformed into something monstrous. They had reached the Iron Gate, which now bore a simple plaque reading, "In memory of Dr. Elena Vasquez, who chose truth over safety." Villatodis. The gate itself remained sealed, except for authorized research expeditions, but Sarah held the only key that could open it completely. What guarantees do we have that this research won't be perverted like Reed's program? Sarah asked. Complete transparency, Martinez answered. Every aspect of the research is monitored by international observers. No classified components, no black budget funding, no military applications without unanimous approval from the Oversight Committee. Dr. Morrison nodded. We've learned from Reed's mistakes. The moment research is conducted in secret, it becomes vulnerable to corruption and abuse. Sarah looked at the Iron Gate, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a broken woman, hiding from the world's complexities. Now she stood as guardian of one of Earth's most precious ecosystems, responsible for decisions that could affect the future of human civilization. The research can continue, she said finally, but with conditions. Any discoveries made here must be shared freely with all nations, not hoarded by the powerful. And if I ever detect signs that this work is being militarized beyond defensive applications, I will seal these chambers permanently. Dr. Morrison extended his hand. Agreed. The world needs guardians like you, Sarah. People who understand that some things are more important than national interests or political advantage. As the sun set over the Appalachian Mountains, casting long shadows across the meadow where Elena's memorial stood, Sarah felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced since losing her family. She had found her purpose again, not as a park ranger protecting wilderness from human intrusion, but as a bridge between the natural world and human civilization. Jasper grazed peacefully nearby, occasionally lifting his head to watch the bustling activity around the research station. The old mule had adapted to their new circumstances with typical stubbornness, accepting the presence of scientists and officials as long as they treated his mountain home with appropriate respect. That evening, as the last helicopter departed and the research station settled into its nightly routine, Sarah walked to the Iron Gate one final time. She could feel the mountain's pulse through the metal, the slow rhythm of an ancient ecosystem that had learned to trust her guardianship. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More politicians seeking to exploit the ecosystem's potential. More scientists eager to unlock its secrets. More decisions about how to balance preservation with humanity's need for protection against the weapons that people like Reed might create. But tonight, the mountain was at peace, and Sarah McKenna had finally found her way home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.